But see, that's the thing though, is like with acting, like you have to be a student for the rest of your life.
Welcome to Story Power, a bi-monthly podcast where my guests and I geek out about the stories we are passionate about in all different genres, styles, and formats. And we'll give a few recommendations to you, our listeners. Beware, possible spoilers ahead. My name is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and I started this podcast during the COVID-19 pandemic. As I watched the reaction of my social media circle, I noticed that many people turned to stories for comfort and help in making sense of the craziness going on around them. And as all good stories do, the world got even crazier. But, as Neil Gaiman says, fairy tales are more than true not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. Since I believe that stories have the power to show us the way and give us courage to keep going, I wanted to see if that was true for my guests as well. This is episode number 20 of Story Power, and today I'm talking to my former student, Scott Hamilton. I think you took every single class that I taught at Cochise College.
Yes.
And Barry and I were just reminiscing about when I did theater workshop and you had written the Star Wars play and we were in the middle of performance and the audience was sitting on the grass and the sprinklers came on. That was pretty interesting.
My family still talks about that because of that night.
Yeah. So Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So I have not gone on any of my social media outlets very much lately, but I was looking at your page and you are in a movie that's coming out soon. And I was really interested to hear about that. So do you want to tell about that?
Yeah. Well, as of, I guess, this recording, the movie is set to come out July 4th weekend timeframe. Limited theater, presence. Mm-hmm. I'm actually in talks with the director to get it down here in Cerro Vista, down at the Uptown 3. So hopefully by the time that movie comes out, locally, people can see it too. But it's called The Righteous 12 with Avondale Pictures. Mm-hmm. I've been taking acting classes with the director of The Righteous 12, and he picked me up for a small role, but it is one of the banditos, which is basically this group that comes into one of the towns. We interact with the main cast in a fun scene. There's not too much I can say outright because I'm not sure exactly what can be released right now, but I get to interact with the main character. So that was an experience all on itself. COVID delayed it a little bit because of some of the filming, as well as we wanted to make sure that the theatrical release was going to be well worth it versus, releasing it to maybe 3 people in a theater. Avondale Pictures, they have a few films out there that they've done on streaming services. So they wanted something that in a theater this time. So they've been holding on to this movie until relaxing some of the measures that we put out there. So hopefully come July 4th, the movie comes out and can't wait to see it.
Oh, that sounds exciting. So I'll have to look up Avondale Pictures.
They've done Shake Off the World and Amazed by You.
Oh.
And those are on most streaming sites. But this one, The Righteous 12, is their big production and all filmed locally in Arizona.
It looked like it might have been partly filmed at the Tucson studios.
Yes. Part of it's filmed at Old Tucson before it shut down. So it is actually the last movie to be filmed as of today in Old Tucson studios.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
But yeah, Old Tucson, a few places around Arizona. And then I think they even filmed in Tombstone.
Oh, really?
Which Tombstone hasn't had a production film since Tombstone back in the 90s. So,
well, and Tombstone has changed.
The Allen Street where they do all the reenactments, I think it's still dirt because I have a few colleagues that do the live reenactment shows.
Did they start doing that again? Because I had a student that was one of the reenactors and they had to stop for a while because the guy who was in charge of it, he had health issues.
I didn't hear about that, but I know that they're back up and running.
Oh, they are. They're back up and running again. Okay. Because, I mean, that's probably big business for Tombstone.
It really is. COVID hit them hard because of the tourism and a lot of their Eldorado days and things like that. But I think they've survived, and they're slowly getting back up to speed. So.
Oh, good. Oh, yeah, that's good. Well, since you were my student, I have seen that you have even written some movies and done some films. That's not your day job, but it must be so fun to do that. Can you tell a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I definitely do a lot of screenwriting. I have at least 6 or 7 scripts that are almost film ready to where I could pick them up and start filming. My whole plan last year was to do more filming, but between COVID and everything else, that delayed it. But I did start up my own YouTube channel, New Idea Productions.
Oh, good.
And it started off with just trying to compete with 1 minute short for one of the other YouTube channels out there. But luckily, we were able to, after that, do a 20-minute short. It took me and my friends months because we were just filming on a Saturday, maybe every other Saturday, depending on what schedules allowed. But we did that filming a few hours a day, and then I edited it all together. And it's not a perfect film, but it was something that I wrote called The First Quest. And I had a bunch of friends have input for character ideas. And we took the cosplay equipment that we had for medieval or Renaissance fair stuff, and we put that all together, and we told a funny story. It was supposed to be a little bit more serious originally, but as we started filming, we realized this is not as dramatic as we wanted. This is definitely more comedic. So we took that, and the scene started developing, and there was a lot of challenges. Like, one of the big things is one of the actors, he filmed all his scenes, but he moved to Florida after that. And we were still filming another 2 or 3 months after that with a lot of other scenes that involved other characters, but we got everything of his taken care of. But the big thing is, anytime we would film a new scene, his character that should have been in the background just disappeared. And it's not something that a lot of people picked up, but me as the filmmaker, editing, watching the same scene 100 times, getting that perfect cut, I'm like, he's gone. Like, he just disappeared, and it doesn't make sense. But it was my first film that I wrote, directed, acted, and then edited. So to me, I didn't care that it wasn't perfect. I spent a lot of experience when I first started acting with a lot of people wanting to make films, spending weeks or months acting and getting the production started just to not have a finished product.
Right.
And that's how it is when you do independent acting. A lot of times with like no budget films, sometimes they never get finished. And I wanted to, especially since I had a lot of friends helping me out with this, I wanted something that we could all sit down afterwards and enjoy something and have a good laugh at it. But what was kind of cool is I also did a casting call for some of the characters, because I had friends that I had in mind for certain characters, because either they do it with role-playing games or they're actual actors. But a couple of the other roles, I still needed people. And so that was an interesting experience to actually throw a casting call out there, get people responding to it, watching auditions and figuring out who would work best for which role.
Right. Oh, and that's such an involved process. And it's something that people who don't act or who aren't involved in theater or movies don't understand, that, somebody could come in and they would be a really great actor, but they don't fit with the other people in your production
Exactly.
And so sometimes you have to take somebody that maybe you don't like as much, or they don't have as much skill, but they fit better with all the other people that you have. And that's a really difficult process.
It really is, which is why it makes me appreciate casting directors out there. I've been very fortunate that I've made connections with a few in Arizona and the surrounding areas. And so anytime I see things, posted, they sometimes reach out to me, say, hey, this might be perfect for you, audition for it. But just seeing what they go through on a daily basis, like, yeah, I could do casting, but it's just such a stressful and anxiety-based job that you're looking at different people. And even if they tell you, hey, this is the role we want, and this is the type of person we want, somebody can walk through those doors, or now on Zoom, and show you something that you weren't even expecting.
Right. And that fits exactly what you need. Yeah. So you've been very busy with that, but I know that you have been involved in cosplay, and you attend Comic-Cons and things like that.
Yes.
Those sound so fun. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, so I've been attending comic conventions for, let's see, 6 or more years. The first time I went was on a recommendation from a friend that had been attending for a few years before that. And that one, I didn't really have a good game plan for what type of cosplays I wanted to go as. It was last minute stuff. But I had a blast, and it really, that first one is actually what got me into wanting to be an actor, because I met Stephen Amell, the lead from Arrow that year. And just seeing him on a panel and getting to talk to him, it changed my entire aspect of what it meant to be an actor, at least with what I was interested in. So after talking to him for a few minutes, that's what got me into, one, going to more into acting, but two, wanting to come to Comic-Con every year. So following that, I did a whole different setup with my costumes. I planned it better, but I've now attended Comic-Cons as Star-Lord from the Guardians of the Galaxy. I've done Green Arrow from the actual Arrow show. I've done Superman, which was one of my favorite ones, just because the costume I had was a pretty good quality, but the cape, walking around, it would catch the wind just perfectly. And a lot of people would constantly stop me asking for photos. Not to mention, I usually have some type of beard going on now, but for that, I shaved for the first time in like 4 years. So that was, an experience on itself. But one thing I did learn about capes is I actually hate them. In large crowded areas, people are constantly stepping on them. Yeah. And it's hilarious because here you're walking as this proud hero, and all of a sudden you get yanked back because somebody stepped on your cape. So what I was planning this last year before COVID hit was my next cosplay, which was going to be Shazam. And I chose that one because, one, the costume looks great, but two, the cape is shorter. It only goes to about waist length. And so I didn't have to worry about people stepping on it. And I was excited, and COVID hit. And it got delayed. And then it got canceled for the year. But I was looking forward to it this year because they were like, we're going to do it in 2021. And so I was working out again, getting to where I could actually have that full Shazam look. But unfortunately, they announced they were going to cancel it again just because COVID was still too high for it to be safe. And, safety is important. So I take any opportunities like Halloween, or I have a few friends that throw costume parties, or even the short films that I do. I try to do where I can wear some of these costumes. Just recently, I actually connected the Superman costume with a short that we wanted to do where it's basically more about the Clark Kent, but at the end, you see his boots and his cape and everything, and you're like, oh, that was Superman. Cosplaying definitely gives me opportunities that I wouldn't have expected.
I don't do Halloween, and I can see myself going to a Comic-Con, but can't see myself dressing up as any characters because, I did theater all those years. And especially if you're doing a period piece, I did plays where the costume was so heavy because I had 7 petticoats, and then I had the corset, and then I had the bun roll, and then I had the overskirt, and then I had the over jacket and the hat and the wig. And it was like, and then the makeup on top of that.
Like when we filmed the first quest, my best friend was one of the actors in it, and he played the more traditional like knight role to where he had the armor, he had the swords, and he's trained with, medieval swordsmanship. So that's one of the reasons why I casted him in that role. But it was an eye-opener being in an armor all day, swinging a sword and seeing the difference of how that wears you down. And he's in great shape. But that was a whole new thing to be filming for 6 hours. Half of that is combat related shots, doing the same thing over and over, and his arms needing to be massaged because of gripping the swords for that long. It was a whole new experience that I had never experienced, even myself. I got lucky. I played a wizard, and so I had, my robes and my hat, but I wielded a wand, 3-ounce wand versus a 2-pound sword for him.
Yes. And when you were talking about the cape issue, that makes that scene in The Incredibles where she says, no capes.
Oh, yes. That actually came into mind because in Phoenix, they have a lot of, at the convention centers, they have escalators. And it was the first time I got stepped on that made me think, oh, when I ride up on the escalators, I should pick up my cape. Even though they have signs like, make sure nothing drags so it doesn't catch, because it's happened before.
Oh, yeah.
But yes, that scene from Incredibles came straight to my mind. I was like, this is why capes suck.
Yeah, really.
They look cool, but they get stepped on way too much, which is why, honestly, with films nowadays, they usually use visual effects to show the cape versus actually having the actors wearing them because it just causes so many issues.
Well, and the one that Superman wears, it's long and it's probably kind of heavy. The costume itself is not so, it's kind of restrictive, I would think.
So the great thing is, like, when I do my cosplays, I've tried to make my own, but I usually contract out to tailors and designers for my costumes now because a fitted costume is so much better than you just buying something and hoping it works because, yeah, you usually have more mobility, but those tighter costumes, you want to be tailored to you. Otherwise, you can't move. Like my Green Arrow one, I had two different ones. I had a looser one that I could do a lot more in, but the tighter one looked better on me.
Right.
But don't ask me to sit down. Don't ask me to squat or do anything crazy because I can't. It's too tight.
Yes. I don't think people understand that either, what an actor goes through in terms of their costumes and their makeup and their hair. We watched Bridgerton not too long ago, and I was listening to Phoebe Denver talk to Conan O'Brien, and he says, "Do you think I could be on Bridgerton?" And she says, "Well, you definitely have the hair." And she was saying all the guys that played her brothers had to sit in the chairs for hours to get their hair to look the period, the way it was supposed to look. And she said, you already have the hair down. So it was kind of funny. I was like, oh yeah, I don't think people realize the stuff that actors have to go through with that.
Well, even with my experience with The Righteous 12, because that was my first, even though it's an independent film, it had a real budget of over $1 million. So that was, seeing how a true Hollywood movie set works and going through the works and getting my hair, my makeup and costuming done, changes the whole thing, but it's not something that you can be like, 5 minutes in and out, I'm done. You have to sit there. They have to, look at you, decide, okay, this is the look, and then have the director okay it because he doesn't want you to be looking like that for some reason, or nope, change that. I don't like it. Go back through. And then being on set for anywhere between 8 to 12 hours, depending on the shoot,
right?
It gets tiring because you're in this costume that you can't really, mess with, and you have to make sure that you don't ruin anything for continuity. Otherwise, the story gets ruined.
Right. Can't eat in it. Or if you do, you have to cover it up.
Yeah, they bib you up. And it was funny because you would think they would choose, for the meals that they provide, safer meals for costumes. But no, it's usually spaghetti, things that can, serve a large group of people. But you're like, I can't eat this because I might get this messed up.
Yeah. Those period costumes that I wore, that one particular one that I was describing was the country wife. And I swear it was 50 pounds. So I lost quite a bit of weight during the run of that show because it was, I think, 6 weeks or something, the run.
Oh, wow.
And sitting down was really difficult in the corsets. So
I don't have any experience with corsets, but breastplate armor is definitely a very similar feeling when it comes to sitting down, because what you don't realize, sitting down comfortably is usually not possible because that armor digs into you.
Right.
So you're usually leaning on trees or even for the first quest, my friend who, like I said, was my knight, I set the scene based off of his comfortability for him to be able to lean against a tree stump. Otherwise, he'd be standing or trying to sit uncomfortably for hours. So I was like, no, we're going to put you there where you can just lean if you need to. And it works for the story without ruining it.
Well, and I can't imagine if they're in a battle and they get knocked down, how do they get back up?
Yeah, exactly. That's why those squires, help them get back up or help them get on horses, or once they're on the horse, they're like, oh yeah, here's your lance or here's your sword, because good luck moving around.
Oh man. So we have it so easy with our sweatshirts and t-shirts and
exactly.
And our jeans. And well, have you been doing any more writing?
Yes, I have. I've been, besides the screenplays, because one of the next short films that I want to do is a vigilante-based film that I want to film in Cerro Vista. COVID hit, so that delayed us there. Once the actors that I casted in it are ready, I do plan on revisiting that. But I'm still working on the full feature attached to that short. But I've also looked at some of the novels that I've been touching here and there over the years. And I went back to one of them recently just because it was always a story I've always wanted to tell. Mm-hmm. And when I was just out of high school, I was trying to get it published through Vertigo Comics because I've always been a comic book fan. And so I always wanted to tell the story through a comic book format. Mm-hmm. But after the years have gone by, I decided, even though I could still pursue that, I think a novelization would be better because I can really go more into detail without having to deal with the artwork and stuff. I can focus more on the story and then go back to the comic if I want to, or use movie formats to tell the story again. But it's a story based off of a small town, similar to Sarah Vista, because I like to use a lot of inspirations from what I have around me. And it deals with human evolution and kind of like the X-Men in the sense of superpowers and stuff, because superhero stories or superpower stories are definitely a genre I love. But I've gone back and started writing that, and I actually got a few more chapters into it that I actually really enjoyed. But between acting and trying to make my own films, I always go back to these novels because I can tell my stories a lot easier with a novel. I don't have to worry about casting or editing or getting film equipment or getting locations booked. Especially during COVID, I can just focus on writing. So I've gone back to a couple of those novels, just adding chapters here and there. Nothing that's set to where I could have it finished, but it's definitely on the right path to where I'm liking the progression that I'm making with it.
Yes. Well, it took me 7 years or something to do my first novel. And I started the second one right after I finished the first draft in 2014, and I'm still working on it. Because, so many things.
It's a lot harder than people think.
It is. It's the making up the stuff is the hard part for me. I love it when I get to the point where I'm reworking it, reorganizing it, editing it. That's more my favorite part of the process. But when I started it, I wanted the character in the past to be involved in the suffrage movement, but there was nothing going on in the present that was connected to that or an echo of that. And so then when things started to heat up with Harvey Weinstein and all that, was like, oh, okay, new inspiration. And then COVID hit and it was like, oh, do I include that in the, So
it's funny that you mentioned that with COVID, because just a couple of weeks ago, I hosted a film festival that the Uptown 3 had presented. It was a 48-hour film festival. And one of the teams that they won Best Film, they threw in COVID-related jokes. Where as they're discussing film ideas, they talked about a person trying to catch COVID, and it literally was them trying to catch a person that was in a weird suit as COVID. But later on, one of the actors literally looks at the camera, breaks the fourth wall, and goes, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! All these people are here, after months of being at home, packed into a theater." And I think they're done with COVID, don't you think? And they look at the camera, and it's one of those moments that I thought was brilliant. It didn't, help bring some levity to the whole COVID issue. But it's one of those things that as we go forward, whether it's through books or television shows or movies, it's, do we include that in our history now? And I know some of the television shows like Chicago Med, do the whole, we've done COVID precautions. We wear our masks until we start, actually needing to act. And we've been tested. And so all these things are being incorporated. But it's definitely, as a storyteller, whether you use COVID itself or you do even a pandemic, it's like, is it too soon? Is it, handling it well? Like one of the short films I wanted to film last year actually dealt with a pandemic that wiped out most of the world's population. And I'm like, do I want to film this now when people are dealing with a real world pandemic and might not, appreciate a film of that manner?
Well, The Stand is like the ultimate pandemic.
Oh, yes. The book or the original miniseries?
The original miniseries is actually the one that made me read the book. The one with Gary Sinise, I'm talking.
Yes.
And Molly Ringwald, and there's a whole bunch of really great people in it. And I have not seen the new one.
I did watch it. It was great that it was so many more episodes, so you got to expand on some things.
Yeah.
My greatest issue with it was probably the ending. I felt it was too Hollywood, too, on the nose with how they handled
Randall Flagg,
his demise, and how basically God's interaction with it. And so they actually have a ball of essentially lightning come in and start blasting his followers and attacking Randall Flagg. And to me, I'm like, that's too Hollywood. Like, that's not what Stephen King's story really had. Like, it had to where humanity were the ones to take the stand, against this darkness. Right. I had some issues there, but everything else I thought was great. I liked the casting for all the characters. I thought they did really well with those stories. It's just there's certain parts that you can tell they wanted production value higher and they wanted more action to pull in people. But because they were able to make it longer over the course, I think, of like 10 or 11 episodes, I thought it told a really good story in that sense.
Yeah.
But I did love the original miniseries. And when I was actually a kid, The Stand was one of the first real novels that I read because my mom had it. A friend had given it to her. She had read it. And it was one of those, I don't know if I'm allowed to read this book, but it looks cool. So I grabbed it and I would read a few chapters here and there as a kid. And it scared me. Of course, it was horror, but I loved it. And it honestly shaped the way that I view a lot of good horror stories, because it's not always about the scare factor or the gore factor. It's about really telling things that affect you deep down when it comes to what really unsettles you. Well, and to me, a virus that wipes out, just starting off with, it wipes out most of the population. There's no way fighting that. So
right. There's all these psychological effects of it that make it that a horror thing too. Yeah, it kind of reminds, I don't know why I was not making an analogy here, but the two movies at the end, Infinity War and Endgame, when most or half the people in the world,
it's half the universe, so it's half the people in our world
are dusted. And it's like, oh, well, that's sort of like a pandemic in a way. And
yes,
and then
it happened so quickly.
Oh, yes. And then the effects in the beginning of Endgame, how people are dealing with all that loss. And that's one of the elements of The Stand that I really love. Okay, well, we have all this loss, and how are we going to deal with it? And some people deal with it by joining Flag, and some people deal with it, no, we don't want to go to the dark side. And the other thing I liked about The Stand was all these people who are just ordinary, regular, everyday people, and they have to step up and be leaders. That's a really interesting element of the story.
That's actually one of my favorite elements of almost any stories, when you do see the ordinary people step up and do things. One of my favorite, I guess, superhero movies that uses that element is a lot of the Spider-Man movies, where Spider-Man has to do something. And like, for example, with the one with Tobey Maguire, he's trying to save the kids in the trolley cart, plus his love interest, Mary Jane, and Green Goblin's messing with them. And on the final one, where you think Spider-Man's going to either die or fail, the citizens of New York stand up against this villain, saying like, hey, you're just going to try to hurt somebody. You're trying to save a bunch of kids. If you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. And I love those story elements because it shows that everyday people can make the difference. They just have to be willing to step up and take action.
Yeah. And when they band together, they're so much stronger.
Oh, yes.
That's an element that I like too. When people go, oh, no, we're not going to stand for this. You can't do that.
Well, even like in the late 70s, when Superman 2 with Christopher Reeve came out, and they introduced Zod, and you have Superman facing three Kryptonians, and he's losing. And it looks like Superman either might be dead or unconscious. The citizens of Metropolis literally grab pipes and start going towards them. And yeah, they're getting blown away and everything, but they still stand up against people that they know for a fact they can't beat.
Right.
But it's, hey, if our heroes fallen, we're picking up that mantle. And I love when, whether it's a superhero story or, like I said, even The Stand, where it's just really ordinary people, whether they've been chosen or they have that goodness of their heart, they decide to do the right thing.
Yes. Well, I'm thinking of that in the Hunger Games when all those people attack the dam, and they all know probably they're all going to get killed, but they're willing to try to blow the dam up to disable the Capitol. That's what.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, so it's okay. I'm willing to give up my life. And anytime, I mean, even like things like The Last Samurai, and Tom Cruise tells the story about the 300, the Spartans, where they stand up against the Greeks and they are all killed. All of them are killed, but they'd stand up anyway. And the leader, played by Ken Watanabe, I love that actor, says, what happened? Oh, they died to a man. And he kind of smiles. It's like, oh yeah, okay. That's what we're doing here.
Actually, a movie that I rewatched recently, The 13th Warrior with Antonio Banderas.
Yeah.
It makes me think of that at the end when the Viking leader, he's been poisoned and he knows he's going to die. You know, all his men go out there, the few warriors that are left.
Right.
And he knows that that's not enough. And even though he's dying and he can't even put on armor, he's dragging his sword. He goes, you know what? I need to still make my fight till I can't swing this sword. And they all see him. They rally behind him. And even though they survive, he doesn't.
Right.
But he survives long enough to get the job done. And so I do love characters that have that sense of honor. And you see it over cultures around the world having different interpretations of it, but still in its essence that against an evil or against the darkness, it's always important to stand up and make whatever stand you have to make until you can't.
So even movies like, The Seven Samurai inspired the Magnificent Seven, and there are 2 or 3 iterations of that. But that I watched The Seven Samurai once when it was on Turner Classic Movies. It's a 4-hour movie, but it is so fantastic because when they hire these samurai, because their master has been killed, and so they don't have a master now. Well, once they get into place, these 7 samurai, then the villagers have more courage to stand up to the brigands that are trying to steal all their crops. And I kind of love that. And ordinary people being inspired by somebody else who has the courage to stand up, even though it's a small amount of people, maybe. So you're right. That is played out in a lot of different cultures and lots of different stories that they tell.
Well, I think it's because it shows the greatest strength of humanity, which is unity by coming together, especially when you see whether it's one or a few people inspire you and show that, all it takes is courage. It gives the opportunity for humanity to come together. And so to me, as a storyteller, I like seeing that utilized in a lot of stories, whether, like I said, it is with heroes, whether it's with everyday people or people that normally can't do something and decide, okay, I have to risk it now and do something.
Well, we've been talking for quite a while now. Do you have any recommendations for our listeners of movies or books?
Yeah. Oh, so for books, one of my favorite stories is by an author named David Gemmell. He's written tons of books. One of my favorite ones, it's a high fantasy series. The book is called The First Chronicles of Dress the Legend.
Oh.
And if people like that, there's a few other books with him in it. But what I really love about it covers more than battles and magic and stuff. It's really about a story about a man who risks everything for the woman he loves. And that's what I actually liked so much about it, because instead of just, all right, here's a really strong guy, he's going to go fight in wars, it's all about traversing the entire country and more, trying to get back his wife. And I'm not going to go too much more into that because there's a lot of twists and turns with it. But I just love the style of David Gemmell. He can paint a picture without spending hours on a blade of grass, because that's one thing that bothers me about some authors. Even though I may love them, they go into too much detail, and he is really good at pacing. Most of his books aren't very long. The Dreadnought Saga has tons of different characters, but it has all in the same world, different time periods. But The First Chronicles of Dress the Legend was my favorite of his. I first read him in Legend, which actually takes that character, and it's at the end of his life. And there's a couple other books which cover his beginnings as well as like some stuff in the middle. So you get to see this character grow over more than just one book, but it's not in a chronological order that you would expect normally. I like tough, strong heroes, but the driving factor for him wasn't, oh, I want glory or I want power. It was love drove him to do all this stuff. And it changed his life in a way that I enjoyed. But yeah, for the books, that's what I would recommend people read. As for movies, honestly, I don't know. Yeah, it just came out recently, but the Zack Snyder cut for Justice League, it's 4 hours long, since we were talking about long movies. It's on HBO Max, but I would recommend people watch it, especially if they did watch the 2017 Justice League that Joss Whedon put out. Because here, you get a storyteller, Zack Snyder, his original vision. Yes, he did some extra reshoots, added a few things, which is why it's 4 hours long. But you get to see what he wanted to tell, as well as what he wanted to tell with the other movies, Man of Steel and Batman versus Superman. Like it connects everything, and it's a well worth watch. Not to mention, I think the cinematography choices that he made tell a better story than anything out there when it comes to superhero movies in recent history. Now, there's some issues with it where people complain that because it's 4 hours long and 10% of the film is in slow motion, it can make it hard to watch. But at least for the first watching, to me, it didn't take me out of the moment. It enhanced the moment with the choices that he made. Not to mention the sound is amazing.
Yeah. And, there are so many directors that would love to do director cuts or something like that because the studio said, oh, you have to cut this or you have to cut that. And he was really lucky to be able to redo that because he didn't want to stop filming. It was some tragedy in his life that, well, they had to find somebody to take it over, and Joss Whedon happened to be the person who took it over. And so, of course, it wasn't his vision then. I mean, Joss Whedon may have tried to follow his vision, but you can't do that, really. You can try to do it the way somebody else wants you to do it, but you don't have the same perspective.
Zack Snyder's known for his director's cuts. Even Batman vs. Superman, they have the Ultimate Edition, which is 3 hours long. But if you watch that, you actually get a 10 times better film, if not more, because you get to see that he sets things up slowly, but it pays off. Now, it may not be a Marvel story where it's telling a fast-paced story, but for me, I enjoyed seeing another aspect of the same coin. That's why I like Zack Snyder. Any of his films, I'd recommend to people out there, whether they're superhero films or not, because he has an eye for storytelling. And for me as a director, I try to emulate a lot of his techniques and choices because I just love him as a director.
Well, Barry and I watched Man of Steel with what would normally be the commentary, but it was Zack Snyder. It was the writers, the editors, some of the special effects people, some of the actors making comments as the movie goes along. We learned so much from watching that. That in itself was entertaining.
Well, that's why, honestly, like for people that like storytelling, like the actual, like what goes into it, I always recommend watching the commentary, whether it's as you're watching the movie or, the DVD extras, because seeing what goes behind the scenes and what prompted for the writers to do certain choices, directors to make choices, or even actors. That's why, like, for formats, my favorite device would be television series, because they're longer run stories and actors can really input stuff later on in the seasons. Whereas if you do a movie or two for the same character, you may not get as much leeway with what you want to do. Now, like people like Johnny Depp with Jack Sparrow, by the end of Pirates, what he was calling the shots is like, no, this is what Jack Sparrow would do. And everybody would be like, yes, you're Johnny Depp, you know what you're doing.
Right.
But for television shows, you get that, usually, especially if you're the lead, you get that same power when it comes to your characters, especially if you become executive producers and stuff of your own show, because then you really get some good power going.
Yeah. My sister and niece and I were talking about Bones. Emily Deschanel and David Boreanaz were both producers of that show. So all the characters had a say in the development, I think. And I love the arc of the way the team develops, the way the relationship between Bones and Booth develops. That's one of my favorite television shows. And I happen to be one that I love books and movies that do that take the time to develop the characters. And I don't care if it's really long. I remember when Dances with Wolves came out in 1990, everybody was complaining that it was a 3-hour movie. Well, you needed that time to develop Kevin Costner's character to, showing that he was dissatisfied with the life that he had been living. And then when he goes out west and he's by himself for all those months, and then he encounters the Native Americans and he sees their way of life, it's like he sees this comparison and he loves the slower pace. There's something about that way of life, the Native American way of life, that he connects with. But you need that time to understand his thought processes, his emotional processes. Yeah.
So the same way with The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise. Here you have a very traumatized character, which he obviously has a lot of issues from his past, but he meets not only a culture, but a people that saves him from his own darkness. And so at the end, to me, it's very sad seeing him. He's, the last samurai. Everybody else died, and he's the last one holding this mantle. But at the same time, when he goes back to the village, he finds his peace. To me, that was one of the greatest feelings I had, because yes, it's a long movie. It's not 3 hours, but I think it was like 2.5 or around there. You needed that time to actually develop this character, to show like, hey, something's bad happened to him, but he's finding the peace he needs.
Well, and then really a lot older story is Shogun. And there's a miniseries that I absolutely love with Richard Chamberlain. He's British. It's in the 1500s. He gets to Japan and he's seduced by the culture, because at that time in England, bathing was looked down upon. Medicine was not very advanced. There are all these elements, ritual of bathing, and the medicine was really a lot better, and the nutrition was better. And there's something about the structure of the culture that he really likes. And that's actually based on a real person, that story. And so that person ending his life he did go back to England, but he returned to Japan, and he lived the rest of his life in Japan because he felt more at home there. So those kinds of stories are really interesting to me too. And maybe that's why I like some of the superhero movies, because they don't know, sometimes they don't realize they're superheroes, or they, like in Captain America's case, he becomes a superhero because of what they've done to him. And then he has to navigate that, but he finds his place because he was always he wanted to contribute something that his physical body would not allow him to contribute.
Well, that's why, obviously, Superman is one of my favorite stories, whether it's through the comic books, graphic novels, or movies and television. But it's why I like Man of Steel when it came out, even though a lot of people had issues with, that's not Superman, he's not saving people. One, this was his first outing as Superman. He's never fought it ever, but my favorite scenes were when they had the young Clark, and it's just after he saved a bunch of his classmates in the bus. And his father is telling hey, you can't do that. And he goes, well, what was I supposed to do? Let them die? And here's a real world answer. I don't know, maybe, because who can really tell you whether or not you should expose yourself or save people? But then later on, as an adult Clark, he almost goes to that same moment when Zod, makes the announcement, and Clark goes to the church.
Right.
And he's talking to the preacher, and he goes, I don't know if I should turn myself in. And the priest, he asks him, well, who do you trust? Mankind or them? Right. And he goes, well, I don't trust them, but I don't know if I can trust mankind either. And he tells them about taking a leap of faith and everything. All these classic Superman, tropes that are used. Here, an all-powerful being not knowing what's the right course to take.
Right.
And it really humanizes him, because that's usually one of the greatest storytelling devices about Superman stories is it's not about his powers. It's never about his powers. And anybody that focuses on that aren't really looking at the story. It's all about how he represents the best of humanity and the choices that he makes and the wisdom that he takes with his actions. And Man of Steel decided to take a new approach with, here's somebody that doesn't have that wisdom yet. But somebody who can make so many choices, how do they respond when they were raised as a human, regardless of, their capability? So it shows us as viewers of the films that maybe that's what we need to do sometimes, is if we can do something, that's great. But at the same time, it's okay to hesitate and dwell on something and really find the answers yourself.
And then take the leap of faith, because that's not just a superhero trope. That's something that religions teach. Yeah, I love that too. Man of Steel is one of my favorites, although I do love the ones from the 70s with Christopher Reeve.
I do too. And for the longest time, Christopher Reeve was my Superman. But as any story that can continue to be told, you have to change it. And Henry Cavill's performance, and as well as the direction that David Goyer took with the writing of it, and Zack Snyder took with the directing, showed us a new version of him that we can take into modern time. And I think that's important.
Yes. Well, and that's why I like to watch different versions of like classic stories like Jane Austen or Jane Eyre or, those stories. I love to see new versions of them and compare them and see if there's anything new that's added to it because of where we are now. Even though those stories were written in the 1800s, they do still have, and Shakespeare is another one. They have those universal themes, but we get to reinterpret them,
I agree. And universal themes are important, especially because people are like, oh, we're remaking too much. And there's honestly nothing wrong with a remake if it's done right and it honors the original piece. But universal themes are important in telling almost the same stories, but with a new lens on it. Yes, as a person that would like remakes to focus more on the bad imaginings of movies or whatnot, to be remade. Like, for example, Aragon, the Inheritance series, was one of my favorite ones reading when I was younger. And the movie was trash. As much as I want to be positive with it, it skipped a lot of important plot devices. That was another studio getting in the way, prevent director from incorporating certain things because they didn't think it was going to, catch his audience attention well. But I was like that were not well made to be remade, as well as some of the better movies being remade. It's just don't try to necessarily outdo the original piece. Tell something new with it versus either shot for shot or, oh, wow, look at what we can do to really make that not a good movie anymore when it actually is.
Yes, I did like that book series too. And I was disappointed in the movie. And then the development of Aragon in the movie was not. It was truncated. Too rushed, right. Yeah.
And that's because, especially with movie studios, when they decide they're going to do these movies, they don't want to take the risk and plan ahead. They want the first movie to be able to stand on its own, which I understand, but at the same time, you can't force a story's progression if you're going to do that.
Right.
One of the series that I'm looking forward to was the Wheel of Time series, and that's one of those things that I'm excited for, but I'm so worried because if they rush the character progression and development, it's going to ruin the story.
Yeah.
But it's a television series, so they should have the time and tell the story properly. And honestly, Aragon would be a better television series than a movie.
Oh, yes, because of the progression of his character through the books. But my sister and I were talking about this very issue that sometimes the money people at the studio get in the way of the storytelling.
Absolutely.
And that's sad.
It is, because it really can either hinders an actor's performance or a director's vision.
Yes.
But that's the entertainment world.
Yeah.
Because even with, as writers for like novels and stuff, one of my friends, he actually sent some stuff to an editing company a few months back, and it was going to be his first book. They told him, for a first book, this is too long. They told him where to cut, and it made him think like, okay, if I cut this, is it still going to tell him the story I want? So what he ended up doing is he actually wrote a shorter novel and sent that to them to edit and go through to see if it's worth publishing. So that way a shorter book could be his first book, because he doesn't want to compromise the story plot points as well as the character development of this bigger book. And it's one of those things that any form of media that you're doing where you have somebody providing the money or worrying about how well this is going to sell, they're going to try to control you and what you can or can't tell.
Which is why we self-published my first book, because it's almost 500 pages or maybe more. And
that's a really long first book.
It is. And it has two timelines. So I'm telling two different stories, they're connected, and I remember I sent it to, there's this woman that wrote this really great fantasy series, and it's called, I think you pronounce it Key or K. And I loved that series. I sent it to her because I wanted to put some quotes on the back of my book. And she got back to me and she said, I have to tell you, this book moved so slowly. It was glacial. I need something that moves faster. And I got to thinking about it and I thought, oh, well, part of the reason why I think I write that kind of book is because I read a lot of books from the 1800s. And that's how they develop.
That's the style.
That's the style. And if you're not patient enough to go through that, which actually all helps with the later telling of the story, then, well, you might as well be reading. I love Louis L'Amour, but his books are 200 pages long or something,
Well, that's like with the Wheel of Time series, Robert Jordan, but he is one of those type of authors that he does take, and I joke about it. He does take like 10 pages to tell you about a blade of grass. But if you read it and have the patience, it pays off in the end.
Yeah.
And that may not be for everybody, because a lot of people, and that's the, I relate that to the Marvel movies and then the DC movies. Marvel's is the fast pace. All right, here's the story. Here's what we're doing. Where the DC ones try to do that slower, setting everything up. And sometimes it can be a little grating or glacial, as your friend was explaining, but it pays off in the end. You just have to have the patience to get through it. Actually, a movie I watched recently on Amazon, Mortal. It is a foreign film made in, I think, Norway. So it has some Norwegian and English dialogue, but the first half, or if not more of the movie, it is a slow build. And to me, I wasn't sure if I was going to watch it past the hour mark. But by the time I got to the end, I was like, this was such a great story, such a great film. It paid off. It set everything up to where, yes, everything happened at the end, but it made it to where it was well worth it, that you went through this character's long, drawn-out progression, his story, his challenges, just to get to what happens in the end. So I'd recommend, if people have the patience to watch a slower starting movie, Mortal on Amazon was amazing.
Well, I've said this a lot. We live in a fast food society. We want everything in the United States. Anyway, that's how it is. We want everything right now. And yes, each Marvel movie is fast paced, but when you take all of them from whenever they started to 2018,
the entire Infinity Saga,
it's like a series. It's like a TV series, and the development of the characters is really great. But yes, each one has all this fast-paced stuff in it. You're right.
Which is interesting, I thought, because when Disney and Marvel opened up with their television shows, like WandaVision, the first 2 episodes, a lot of people stopped watching because it wasn't necessarily that it was slow. It's just, it didn't make sense. There wasn't a lot of things moving fast enough. But as soon as you get to episode 3, WandaVision opened up for a greater story, and everything made sense of why those first 2 episodes were like that. But I remember reading a lot of bad reviews or people telling me I couldn't get past the first episode. I'm like, keep watching. I know it's a little harder compared to what Marvel usually puts out there, but once you get to episode 3 and 4, you don't even care about episode 1 and 2 the way that it was. You realize this is why they made those choices.
Well, we watched WandaVision, and I didn't feel that way at all. Because
that's good. I didn't either, but I had tons of friends and tons of, I was reading a lot of critics and YouTuber reviews, and I'm like, come on, guys, experience something new.
I'm one of those people that's willing to stick with it. I will only throw a book across the room or stop reading it if I'm not engaged with the characters. If it doesn't look like they're going to grow, then I put the book down. But that's not how it is with WandaVision. I mean, it to us, it was obvious from the very beginning, but probably because we had watched those shows from the 1960s and 70s and 80s, that was where her mind was. She was replicating something that she had experienced. For us, it was just obvious. Maybe it's because I had read some of the stuff about it, that she was living in her own created world.
Because I'm one of those people that, especially if I love the beginning, I'll rewatch it. My go-to story television show that I watch yearly is Smallville, because I don't mind rewatching the same show over and over and picking up new things that I didn't see the first time. And as somebody now who has studied acting and has studied filmmaking, I like watching those things to see things that I didn't even think of. And I'm like, oh, that's why they made that choice. Or that's interesting. And I'll take notes and I'll write it down. For a future film, I want that same type of shot, or for a future story, I want that same type of, plot device or that moment.
I like rewatching too. We would rewatch the very first original Star Trek. My brother and I would, when they would be reruns in the summer. And my dad would say, why are you rewatching that? Well, it's Shakespearean. I didn't understand that, but there was something so universal about the storytelling that I really liked. And, there have been other series that I go rewatch. If it's on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I didn't even start watching it.
Buffy, that's another show that I will watch either yearly or, every couple of years because I love the story.
Yeah. And Angel, I love that one too.
Oh.
And when it first came out, I saw the title and I went, Buffy the Vampire Slayer? That sounds really stupid. And I was teaching high school. I was teaching at Buena at the time.
Oh, wow.
And some of my acting students came in and said, have you seen Buffy the Vampire Slayer? And I said, no, that sounds stupid. Oh, no, miss, you have got to go and watch it. So it came on TNT and I happened to see the very first episode and I was hooked. And it was fabulous. So students are always giving me great
recommendations.
Recommendations, yeah.
Well, one of the things that I've started also doing recently, so like a show that's big now is Chicago Med. I watched a few episodes because my mom loves that show. And it was interesting how they made choices with their cinematography as well as just dialogue and stuff. The film style, just the cleanness of it bothers me a little because I like older shows, so I like that grittiness that you have with the older shows. But it caused me to watch all 15 seasons of ER just to compare something from the 90s to today. Same type of show where it's an emergency room drama, and seeing how dialogues are or simple things of trauma room cinematography. How you show crazy fast-paced things are happening where they're concerned with somebody being sick and things like that, how it's handled back then versus now. And to me, as a filmmaker, I still like the 90s way of telling stories versus the way that they do nowadays. But it's one of those things that sometimes it's a little bit slower versus where nowadays they try to really capture you in that 40 to 45 minute time frame for an hour-long show versus back then. They didn't really worry too much about it because, well, if you missed it, it's not like you could just, stream it. So people watch those shows. But that's also another thing that I liked about the 90s way of telling stories from novels is they did miniseries events versus trying to tell it all at one go. You had It, The Langoliers, The Stand, all that stuff was shown over 2 or 3 nights, depending on the movie.
I think the very first one that I ever saw, I think was 1978 or something like that. And it was called Centennial. And it took place in Colorado and it was about the mountain men and how white people moved west. So I'd see these miniseries and then I'd go read the book. And I think that that's a great way to tell a story is to have a limited series. And then they can take their time to develop the characters and tell the story. And it's interesting how many people are watching BritBox now because the BBC does those limited series in a really great way. Well, not just BBC, but ITV.
Well, honestly, for the foreign film way of telling stories, it's actually something that I recommend to everybody is to watch films made in other countries because you get to see a whole new way of telling very similar stories that us as Americans tell, but just how they tell that story can really open your eyes to also a great experience.
Yes. We just recently watched a couple. One was Antonio Banderas, and I think it's Automaton or something. And it's a sci-fi dystopian movie, a Bulgarian Spanish movie. It's really interesting, though, the way they tell the story, like you said.
One of the series that was on Netflix was a Norwegian one, Ragnarok, and just seeing the dialogue choices, story devices that they used, I really enjoyed it. It's one of those things that the first episode, a little slow going, but by the second episode, things are picking up. Still the same type of stories that we tell in America, but just told differently.
And I don't know who produced The Witcher, but we watched that too. Those are written by
a Polish author.
Yeah, which I want to go read those.
I actually, on my bookshelf behind me, have all the novels that he's written. And I bought them after the show, but I was introduced to The Witcher by the video game initially. And then the show came out and I loved it. but the show takes place before all the video games. So it made me interested, and I started reading the first couple of books. The sad thing is the translation to English is not the best. So it can be a little weird reading, but it actually makes me want to learn Polish because apparently reading it in Polish has a whole new experience.
I heard somebody on What Should I Read Next talking about that series and how she knew Polish and she read them in Polish. And she was talking about reading in another language. I started to learn Spanish and then I stopped. I don't have a lot of time because I'm the one person who does the recording, the editing, the putting the show notes together and everything for my podcast. And that takes a long time,
It does. And that's the one thing, like when I did my first short film and being basically the writer, the casting director, the director, the editor, an actor in it, my director of photography, he had to drop out halfway through it. So I had to pick up all the camera work as well. Trying to, work with people that weren't actually actors, but loved doing a short film, doing all of that. By the time I sat down to edit, and I'm like, do I really want to do this? Because this takes a lot of time going through the same footage or the multiple shots of the same scene and choosing what's the best, take and syncing up the audio and then scoring the soundtrack. And it's like, this is a lot of work for one person to do. So I feel you there when you're doing all the stuff for the podcast.
Yes. If you're not a patient person, then you don't want to be an author. You don't want to be a movie maker. You don't want to, you don't want to be an
There's
artist.
A lot of things in the entertainment world that you have to have patience for. And if you don't have that, it doesn't matter if you're just a writer.
Right.
You're going to have a hard time enjoying what you do.
Well, even artists. I mean, because my husband's a potter, he's a graphic artist. It takes time to do those. You can't just throw those together in one day. You got to throw the pot, then you have to let it dry, then you fire it, then you take it out, then you glaze it, then you fire it again. I mean, it's this long process.
Exactly. Like recently, I took an old drawing of Shazam, a DC character that I just penciled because I used to want to be a comic book artist. So I drew it. It came out really good, but I've wanted to develop some inking skills with colors. And so I inked it black and white, and then I added the colors, and then I added a background. And it took me a couple of days to really get the look I wanted. And then afterwards, like I took pictures of it, I posted it on my social media, but I looked at it, I was like, oh, I need to touch this up. I need to go back. And so even when you're done as an artist, a lot of times you got to go back in and touch things up.
Well, I did see some of your drawings on your Facebook page. That might have been the one that you were talking about. Yeah.
Yep. I even posted on multi-stage so you could see the black and white inked. You can see the character colored and then the finished product of the full thing. And that's actually one of the things that I've been trying to do recently is I want to start decorating my walls with my own art that is colored. So my next project is a Wonder Woman drawing that I'm drawing, and then I'm going to ink, and then I'm going to color, and then I'm going to frame that as well. And just start decorating my office space with my own artwork.
Now, are you still working up on post?
Yes, I'm still working up there. It pays the bills, but it, like I said, it allows me to continue to take classes. Basically, every week I go up to Tucson and I take acting classes up there, which allows me to network. I've gotten offers to do some cosplay modeling up there. I've gotten offers for more films, and it also allows me to learn new things. Like I said, just being on the set of The Righteous 12 alone, like I said, seeing how directors of photography work. One, the cameras, like they brought in this 5K red camera on this harness, and you have the director of photography using a gimbal controller to control the camera while you have this, she may have been like 110, 120 pounds tops, holding this like 50-pound camera with this whole rig around her. But because of it, she can hold it for hours, and she just has to position where the camera is while the director of the photography actually moves the camera. This is incredible. And then, having the director come on set and seeing how he directs each individual actor or tells his DP, like, hey, this is what I want you to try to shoot next, or can we try to get this shot? Seeing some talented stunt work. They flew in a guy who was one of the main cowboys who he's done worldwide work for not just acting, but for stunts, like actual professional stunts. So he came in and worked with us because we had a cool fight scene that I can't wait to see on film.
Yeah,
And,
that looks fun.
Well, one of the biggest like concerns of any actor is you never know if your scene's going to get cut from a film until it comes out. Because until it comes out, you don't know. Or you don't know if like, oh, that's just my shoulder versus my face. The great thing about this film, for at least for me, that I feel is since I interact with the main character, there's no way I can get cut. I have to be in the film. Otherwise, the scene doesn't work. So I'm excited for it, just for that alone. I may not talk, but you're going to see my face, and seeing my face on a big screen is going to be an awesome feeling. Because I've seen it for like film festival and stuff, but this is an actual, like I said, over $1 million budgeted film. So it's going to have a whole different enjoyment to it.
Yeah. Dave Dahl, who's my colleague at the college, he's been a professional in theater for about 25 years. He has a lot of contacts and stuff, but one of the things he said is the entertainment industry is really, really small. So the contacts you're making are going to help you in the future.
It's all about contacts in the film industry because it is a lot smaller than people think.
Yeah.
And honestly, if you watch a lot of especially the bigger Hollywood films, you're like, why is this the same actor in this film? Like, why are they using the same actors? It's because there's tons of people out there, but to really sell the movie, you want those, the same people.
Yeah.
One, you can trust them, but two, they also bring in the money.
Well, and if you are a very reliable person, then people will talk about you. And that's how I think the really great character actors get their jobs. They'll be in this television show or this commercial or this movie, and it's because they're reliable.
Well, that's why like my greatest advice to any actor out there that wants to get into acting, whether it's film or even stage, don't necessarily only focus on the acting portion. If somebody says, hey, I have this project, whether it's film or stage, I could use an additional production assistant or a grip, take it. If you can have the opportunity to set aside that time, even if it's not even paying, take it, because just making that connection, showing that, hey, I'm reliable when it comes to getting things done, opens up so many more opportunities for yourself in the future.
Well, and that's why Dave did stage managing and acting and directing. He does all those because it helps him make contacts. People get to know him because of his work.
But see, that's the thing, though, is like with acting, like you have to be a student for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
You have to learn, you have to be willing to learn new techniques and constantly, even if you're not acting actively, taking classes alone right there, whether it's keeping up your toolbox sharp for all your skills, it also keeps those connections active. Whether it's people that are doing it as a hobby or actually trying to pursue a career, you get to meet different people. Yeah. And that alone, because you never know what type of impression you're going to make on somebody.
That's
and
right.
how that's going to affect you even 5 years from now. With my YouTube channel, New Idea Productions, is I think I only have like maybe 30 subscribers, but my one film that's really on there has 400 views, which is not a lot, but that's because I haven't been as active. Like I did actually a lot of research with how to really build your YouTube channel. Unfortunately, I haven't taken advantage of all that research and found ways to constantly be producing stuff, because that's how you grow your numbers. The fact that you're putting multiple podcast episodes, that's how you get started.
That's right. That's why I wanted to talk to you, because I knew that you were making films and that you were interested in cosplay and you were interested in Comic-Con and your writing.
Yeah, with my writing, like I said, I mainly focus on screenplays, and that's because even as an actor, like the best thing you can do, even if you're not finding work, is to make your own work. Even if it's with a phone and using like iMovie and editing your film, why not? Like tell a short story and learn the ins and outs and all the challenges that comes with it. But it educates you and makes you a better storyteller once you start learning all those small little details.
Right.
And so a lot of times, like I'll get an inspiration for a small theme, or just the friends that I hang out with. A lot of us are storytellers of some kind. Like I said, I have a friend who's written some novels, but we do a lot of tabletop role-playing games, and that alone inspires me for different stories. And so anytime I get that inspiration, I usually sit down, I pull up my script writing program, and I start writing a few pages here and there, and then I go back to it and I touch it up. Even if I'm not filming it, I just touch it up constantly, so that way I can add new angles that I want to explore for,
Right.
certain stories, just taking place in the film festivals. I've made contacts to where a lot of people, even locally now, want to just make short films.
Yes.
One of the things that we're talking about doing is actually filming a pilot for a show. And because of how all these streaming sites have now started growing, we need a lot of new original stuff that is just theirs. So because of that, we're looking at hopefully sometime in the next few months filming a pilot and trying to market it towards one of Netflix's offices to try to see if we can get it on Netflix. But now,
it's not so
it's
hard.
a lot more feasible.
Well, this has been fun. I'll go check out your YouTube channel and your Facebook page. Thank you for being my guest.
Of course. Thank you for inviting me.
I hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you heard, please share it with a friend and give us a review on your favorite podcast app. It will help people find us. You'll find the show notes for this episode at my website, Sage Woman Chronicles, at sagewoman.life. You can leave a comment there. And remember, as Philip Pullman said, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. Until next time, this is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. Thanks for listening.